In my approach to 20 years abroad, outside of the US, I have definitely heard many complaints about Americans around the world. But I feel as though I very often hear Italians having very strong judgments about Americans. Maybe because there are so many Americans that make their way to Italy at one point or another. But it doesn't matter whether it was when I was living there or even if I'm just on a quick trip back to the country. I will almost be sure that I will hear at least about one of these 10 things in this episode at least a couple of times during any stint in Italy, no matter how short it is. I'm Rafael Di Furia. This is another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter, and roll that intro. Starting this list off in no particular order whatsoever, just jump straight into the episode. Speaking loudly in public. This is something that I often hear Italians, and actually not just Italians complaining about, but people of all different nationalities, especially complaining about American tourists. I can say I definitely see why, and I would almost even say that there are certain nationalities that you can tell from a far distance, from blocks away, what country they might be from just based on the volume at which they speak. And when it comes to Americans, I can agree that Americans abroad, especially in comparison to other nationalities, can speak quite loudly. I mean, I would almost even say that you can say if it's like a block or more or roughly in that distance, I almost will always guess that it might be an American if it's very clear that there are people talking at a loud volume, if they're not at a bar. Then that's a different situation. All bets are off the table if you're thinking that you're hearing something from a bar. But if you're just walking down a normal street and you're hearing conversation, I would almost put money if there are people that are speaking at a loud volume that they potentially could be American. I'm not trying to speak down to Americans in this episode in any way, but these are just things that people do notice, and Americans often have a tendency to speak at a different volume than other nationalities. Again, not a bad thing, not a good thing, just a different thing, although there are other nationalities that might complain about this a little bit. And it is funny to me, especially because the stereotype of Italians in the US is a lot of hand gestures, loud speaking, and very animated when speaking. But it ends up that many Italians have the opinion of Americans that they are the ones that actually tend to be loud. I mean, it's horrible to say, but I could almost rank certain nationalities based on how loud they might be, especially while on vacation. Americans sober might be at the top of that list or very close to it. The one group, though, that comes very close while inebriated might be the British. Loud group of inebriated individuals from the Great Britannia. Yeah. Anyway, that's not the topic of this episode. I do more or less have a list of nationalities and how loud they are based on how much you can notice them while walking down the street, but that's not for this episode. Before we get into the next section of this episode, I do want to say a huge thank you to those of you who support this channel through rafaeldifuria.com/Patreon on a monthly basis. It really does help the channel, as well as the thanks button on YouTube, the new hype button here on YouTube, especially if you're watching this within the first 7 days after it's been uploaded, and also the like button and sharing it with your friends. All of these things help this project in various different ways, so thank you to those of you who do take the time to help this project out. The second thing, though, that I've heard Italians complaining about Americans, more in a social sort of situation rather than just kind of noticing them in general. And again, in this episode, I'm not trying to say Americans bad or this or good or bad or these are gross generalizations, and these are sometimes stereotypes or just ideas that some people have or complaints that I've heard. I'm just sharing them, and maybe not every Italian will have these opinions, but some, well, many actually do. But this next one is about rushing meals and asking for a check very quickly while eating. In Italy, it's very common that you enjoy your evening out, that it's kind of like an event. If you're going out to a meal, that you enjoy the time that you're spending with the people around you. You don't rush through what you're eating. You don't eat quickly. And even for me, having left America so long ago, I still have a natural tendency to eat quite quickly. And even when I've been with friends or even when dating non-Americans, I have had the situation where maybe an ex-girlfriend said, hey, why are you eating so quickly? Like, enjoy the food, enjoy what you're eating. But it's just a habit that just naturally built up. I can say, though, I have gotten better about it over the years, but in social situations, be prepared to take a meal slow. And if you are even going to a restaurant, I mean, it's very common in the US that, of course, like you go to a restaurant and you'll have each course come out pretty quickly and maybe even get some slight hints that, hey, it's time to kind of head out. In Italy, Can that happen? Yes, especially in a busy tourist area, but it's very common that when you see a reservation made at a restaurant, it's not just for like X period of time. It's kind of they're expecting maybe for a table to be held for a full evening. Not always the case, but something that I have noticed that many restaurants do. But another thing I've heard Italians complain about, even Italians who speak English, is the assumption that everybody else speaks English. And it's not just Americans who do this or just people who speak English, but there are different people of different nationalities and that speak different languages that do this. Even I have family members that are Spanish speakers and that they do the same kind of thing. And that is just to assume that when you're going to a place that the people are going to speak the same language as you. Granted, it's very possible that they might, but going into a new situation and understanding a little bit of how they communicate can help you a lot. And it's not guaranteed that if you're coming to visit Italy, that you're going to be on a trip in the country, that the staff at a hotel or a pensione or wherever type of place you're going to be staying at will speak English. I've had experiences where I was in a major city and it was just the case that nobody at the hotel or pensione or whatever it was that I was staying at spoke any English of any kind. Then I've been in the middle of nowhere in a small little town with not that many people staying at a hotel, and what do you know? Perfect English. You can't rely on that everybody's going to be able to speak English. Of course, if you have some sort of app that you can maybe rely on to be able to speak into, DeepL, Google Translate, they're not perfect, but they can help in certain extreme situations. But another thing that I've heard many people complaining about, again, not just Italians, but in American culture, there is this natural excitement that is unnatural to a lot of other nationalities, just culturally. There's a form of overenthusiasm that just reads as sarcasm, that just, it comes off in the wrong way and rubs a lot of people the wrong way. There are going to be places where they might be able to match that energy, or there are going to be certain people who enjoy that, but not necessarily understand certain cultural aspects. I mean, especially maybe people from the West Coast have a certain way of being, people from the East Coast of the US have a certain way of being, and maybe there are going to be certain aspects of that that might not necessarily be, even within the US, things that are going to be maybe someone from the East Coast being so crazy about maybe someone from the West Coast. These things can also come up as well within one nation, but there is an aspect of American friendliness and just smiling at everybody that can be very strange. Or even, for example, entering a store, or I don't know, going into some sort of situation that isn't social where you don't actually know the person and say, "Hey, how are you doing? Hey, how's it going?" I've mentioned this in previous episodes that type of question in many parts of the world is only something that you'll ask to a friend, or maybe someone who you have some sort of basic interaction with on a somewhat regular basis. Like, for example, in many places, if you ask someone that type of question, they might actually tell you how they are doing. They might give you the full story of what is going on in their life because that's what you asked them. But it's not like in the States or in American English where it's like, "Hey, how's it going?" means just that's it. Good is the answer, the only answer, the final answer. Not bad, not, "Hey, well, it's been a crappy day. It's been a wonderful day. It's been this kind of week." Nobody cares about that unless they're really close to you. So asking that type of question, "Hey, what's up?" Be ready for someone either to give you the whole story or kind of be maybe a little bit off put that like, "Hey, I don't know you like that. You don't know me like that." Another thing that Italians often get quite annoyed by is that there is a stereotyping of Italy, that it's only pizza, pasta, Colosseum, gladiators, and Venice, and cannoli. Italy is a lot more than just some of the details that many of us might have seen while in other parts of the world. Even in other parts of Europe, there are stereotypes of Italians that don't hold totally true. Maybe there's a certain basis for certain basic little pieces here and there, but when we're talking about what Italy has to offer, we're talking about many regions that all have their own different way of going about things, even slightly different cultures or very different cultures, different ways of speaking, sometimes even the way that the language is put together or the words that can be used, the accents, the dialects. We're talking about a pretty varied group of people all within the same nation. So there's not just one version of Italy. There are many different tastes that Italy has to offer. But the next thing that I've heard Italians complain about, not just maybe in a social sense, but also to the extent where certain mayors have spoken about maybe even putting regulations about how tourists and people should be dressing in a certain place. Even though it may or may not have happened in some places, that's not the topic. But the way that Americans dress definitely is not something that Italians are so crazy about very often, and especially when it comes to how casual many people can dress. And it's not just Americans. There are many people of different nationalities. Maybe wearing flip-flops in a city is not so socially acceptable. Even if it's really hot in the middle of summer, there are not going to be a lot of toes that you see dangling out on an Italian street in probably a fair amount of cities. If you're by the beach, if you're somewhere there, then like that's a different story. If you're actually on the beach itself, if you're walking around in the town, it could be a little bit of a different situation. But even going to a restaurant wearing maybe flip-flops, depending on where you are, they might look at you a certain type of way, and there will definitely be places that won't let you in. And even though on recent trips to Italy, I've noticed an increase in athleisure wear being worn in the streets, I would still say it's definitely best to avoid if possible. Unless you're actually going to be working out, then that's a different thing. But keep the athletic wear for where you're actually going to be needing athletic wear. Another thing, though, that I've heard many Italians complain about, again, not just Americans, but definitely a lot of Americans, doing Italy too fast. And this kind of ties in with the aspect of stereotyping Italy, that it only offers certain things. And maybe Americans will only go to Rome, Venice, Naples, Florence, and not think that anything else exists in the country. And then on top, that they think that's all Italy has to offer, but then only do all of that within the space of a week or a couple of days. Because if you're seeing so much of the country, you don't experience the real Italy. You don't get to fully take it in if you are arriving, being put on a bus, staying in a hotel, waking up at 7, walking around, seeing a few museums, eating some random pizza at some random place where the tour operator is probably going to be getting a kickback, and then heading back and going off to the next place. You're not getting a real feel for the real place itself. And this is, again, why I often recommend, when talking about moving abroad, about actually spending time in a place, because even a week is not enough to really get a good feel when you are thinking about moving abroad. A month, that starts to become just barely enough, in my opinion, because yes, you'll get a feel for what is in your area and what some aspects of life will offer, but to really understand what the life is properly like there, you need a year to see all of the different seasons, all of the different events, all of the different stages that happen throughout the year. And especially in a country like Italy, when there are so many different things that go on, the different feasts or the different festivals or the different performances or whatever it might be that's going on, Italy has a different flavor from one region to another, but also from one part of the year to the next, each season to the next. It's almost like Italy has a different essence, in a sense, that it's always Italy, but it's always unique to just a certain part of the year. And of course, if you're traveling, you're not going to get the full experience. But if you are traveling, then take your time. Really take a moment to breathe and really get in touch with the place that you've decided to go and visit. And this next point actually has a lot to do with that previous point, as well as just treating Italy like a backdrop. Just getting on a bus, going, taking the picture with the Pisa Tower, the Leaning Tower, and then going off to the next place, but not actually taking the time to really learn about the culture, learn about the history, learn about what the place has to offer, and truly taking it in. Because this point is so related in many ways to the last one, I'm going to just keep this one quick and move on to the next point, which has to do with improving Italian dishes. This is not something about coming to Italy, but another thing that many Italians really love to make sure that Americans know is the improvisations and the improvements that have been made to their dishes, and how horrible and disgusting it is that you could even put chicken on pasta. How dare you, sir? How dare you? Don't even mention barbecue chicken pizza. That is a sin of the highest degree. But even for me, as someone who's Italian American, there are certain things like ketchup on pasta, which I don't know if I've ever told this story before. Maybe I have, but many moons ago in a country far, far away, I was dating a woman, and she and I were visiting my mother. We were staying and visiting her, and we were on our own for a day. And she just decided she wanted to make herself a little snack. And she said, "Oh, I'm going to make some pasta. Do you want any?" I was like, no, thanks. Go ahead and make it for yourself. And I showed her where everything was. She was boiling the pasta, and I got the tomato sauce out for her. And then she asked me the one question that really ended the relationship. And you think I'm joking, but I'm not. And she asked, where was the ketchup? I was beyond horrified. I was mortified, thinking, how could you do this in the house of my mother? Such disrespect, not only to my people, the cuisine, but to my mother. How could you do such a thing? I didn't express that fully. I was just in too much shock at the time. And no, that didn't actually end the relationship, but it could have been a contributing factor. I'm not going to deny that. So I can definitely understand when Italians have complaints about certain ways that other nationalities have destroyed their dishes, even though I actually do know many Italians who have gone to the US, tried American pizza, and enjoyed it. But they don't like to admit it. Just one of those things. But the 10th and final thing that I will mention in this episode that I'm sure many of you will know and already not even have a second thought about it. There have been a number of you over the years who've mentioned it under my videos because there is a factor, there is a detail that is shared between almost every one of the videos on this channel, and that is wearing a hat inside. Even though among many people, wearing a hat inside is acceptable, of course, maybe a little bit more of an old-fashioned way of looking at things is that you don't wear a hat in the house, especially not at the table and especially not in a restaurant, and it's just a respect thing, and not in a church. But it's not that you won't see people wearing hats in Italy, but it will depend on the situation. More likely, if you go inside, a person will take it off. It is also very, very common that inside of a church, a person will take it off. Not every church is going to make someone take the hat off, but it's very common to see. But again, it's not like Italians don't wear hats, but I would say maybe once we get closer to wintertime is when you see a lot more come out. In the summertime, I have started seeing a lot more baseball caps in the country, especially with the younger generations. And even with the younger generations, seeing them wearing sweatpants outside. I can't believe the things that I've been seeing in recent years, and it has just been increasing more and more and more. There have been days I have walked on the streets of Italy thinking that things just aren't what they used to be anymore. But anyway, this has been another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter. I'm Rafael Di Furia. Thank you for joining me for this episode, especially a huge thank you to those of you who support this project through rafaeldifuria.com/Patreon, patreon.com/RafaelDiFuria, the thanks button here on YouTube, as well as the new hype button here on YouTube, and also rafaeldifuria.com/support. Of course, if you have any points to add about things you've heard Italians complain about, or if you are an Italian and you have something to complain about that Americans do, feel free to leave it under this video on YouTube in the comment section down below. But of course, again, we have been here for another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter. I'm Rafael Di Furia. Stay safe and healthy, and I will see you all next time. Later.